When we think about spam, we usually think about it in the context of inbound spam and how to protect your business from the influx of inbound spam. However, businesses should also think about preventing their mail server from sending outbound spam. And if you use MDaemon in your business environment, I'm going to show you the steps you can take to ensure that MDaemon is not sending outbound spam. So there are 4 steps to stopping outbound spam in MDaemon. The first thing we need to do is locate the outbound spam message in the SMTP out log and copy its message ID header. Now in MDaemon, you'll find the SMTP out log inside the MDaemon directory, inside the logs folder, and here's my SMTP out log. So when you find the outbound session, locate its message ID header. And here is what that looks like. And then copy it to your clipboard. The next step is to locate that spam message using the same message ID header in the SMTP in log to find the session where it was accepted by MDaemon. And if SMTP authentication was used, then we need to go in and change the MDaemon user's password. However, if the sender is not authenticating, then MDaemon is not properly configured to prevent spoofing. And to configure MDaemon to prevent spoofing, we need to configure a few things. We need to require SMTP authentication so that users who send outbound mail are authenticating with a username and password. We need to configure the IP shield to ensure that messages claiming to come from your domain must have come from an authorized IP address or a range of IP addresses unless SMTP authentication is used. And then also configure SPF, DKIM, and DMARC to further protect your domain from outbound spoofing. So let's talk about these steps in a little bit more detail. So let's say, for example, a local account is sending out spam. Well, let's talk about how to troubleshoot that. So first, like I mentioned, we locate the spam message in the SMTP out log. And here's an example. We find that message ID header and we copy it to the clipboard. Now, if MDaemon is not adding a message ID header to your messages, there is a setting you can configure to fix that. So in MDaemon Remote Administration, to ensure that the message ID header is present in all sessions, you can go to the Setup menu, select Preferences, then click on Headers, and make sure this box is checked where it says, if missing, insert these headers. Make sure message ID is selected. So now that we've copied the message ID header to the clipboard from the SMTP out log, or step 2, would be to locate that spam message in the SMTP in log by doing a search for that message ID header. And in this case, we can see the sender's IP address, we can see the host name that was used by the sender, and then here we can see that the sender successfully authenticated with the credentials of the local user. So if authentication was successful, then we need to go in and change the user's password. So for example, under the main menu in MDaemon, we can go to Account Manager, find the account, and then open it up. And then over here where it says mailbox password, you can type in a new password and then retype it to confirm, and then be sure and apply and save your changes. Now, if the sender is not authenticating, then MDaemon is not properly configured to prevent spoofing. So to configure MDaemon to prevent outbound spoofing, there are a number of measures you can take. Number 1, and this should be a basic requirement on all mail servers, is that you require SMTP authentication using a username and password. My next recommendation is to configure the IP shield in MDaemon. The IP shield allows you to specify what IP address or IP address range an inbound connection must have come from if the sending email address is a designated domain, in this case, a local domain. So for example, you would configure the IP shield to associate all of the IP addresses on your local network with your MDaemon domain. And you can configure exceptions for those using SMTP authentication for those connecting outside of your network. And in MDaemon, you'll find the IP shield settings under the security menu, under Sender Authentication, right here under the IP shield. Check the box to enable the IP shield, and then scroll down and enter the domain, and then enter the IP address or the IP address range like this. And you can use an asterisk or a wildcard to indicate an actual range of IP addresses. So if you want to accommodate all of the IP addresses on your local network, you can do that using an asterisk as shown here, and then be sure and hit Add, and then save your changes. Also make sure that you are using SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, not only to check for inbound spoofing, but to protect your domain from outbound spoofing. Here's a quick overview of how SPF works, or Sender Policy Framework. The first step is to publish what we call an SPF record to DNS. This SPF record indicates what servers are allowed to send mail from your domain. And these can include mail servers, gateways, intermediary devices, and things like that. So then when one of your users sends an outbound email, the receiving server first checks the SPF record to verify if the sending server is authorized to send email for that particular domain. And then based on the contents of the SPF record, if the sending server is not authorized to send on behalf of the domain, then the message can be rejected. If the sending server is authorized as a legitimate sending server for the domain, then the email can be accepted. Here's an example of an SPF record. This is what you would publish to DNS. Every SPF record has the V equals tab, which is basically version. It represents the SPF protocol version. In most cases, it will almost always say V equals SPF1. Then we include the IP address, or IP addresses, or IP address ranges that are allowed to send mail on behalf of your domain. You can also use what we call an include statement to include another domain or subdomain's SPF records when considering what servers are authorized to send on behalf of your domain. And then the all symbol, the hyphen all, is a tag that provides instructions of what the recipient should do if SPF does not match. There's a hard fail, and then there's another situation, what we call a soft fail, which we'll talk about here shortly. So here's another example of an SPF record. Again, we have the version number, SPF1. We also have another tag indicating that any valid MX record for the domain is authorized to send mail on behalf of the domain. We can also allow any valid A records for the domain to be considered authorized sending servers. And if you're using IPv6, you can add the IPv6 address as well. And then you can also include what we call this tilde symbol as a soft fill, which will allow recipients or instruct receiving servers to accept the message, but tag it as suspicious. So for protecting your domain from outbound spam using SPF, there aren't any configuration changes you need to make in MDaemon on the outbound side. You would simply want to make sure that you publish your SPF record to DNS. Now you can configure MDaemon to check SPF records for inbound mail, but that's not going to be relevant for protecting your mail server from outbound spoofing. The next protective measure you can take to protect against outbound spoofing is to configure DKIM, or Domain Keys Identified Mail. The way DKIM works is you publish a DKIM public key to your DNS records, and then when an email is sent from the mail server, let's say in this case MDaemon, that message is signed with the corresponding DKIM private key. The receiving email server sees that the message has been signed by DKIM. It sees the DKIM signature in the message headers, and it takes the sending domain, looks up that domain's DKIM record in DNS, and checks to see if it has a public key. If that domain does have a public DKIM key, then it checks to see if it matches the private key that was used to sign the message. If the keys do not match, then the message can be rejected or quarantined. If the public and private keys match, then the message can be accepted and delivered to the receiving user. So in MDaemon, to help protect against outbound spoofing, you want to ensure that all of your outbound messages are being signed by DKIM. And for that, again, under the Sender Authentication menu, we can go to DKIM signing as shown here. Check this box to sign all outgoing messages with DKIM, and then you'll need to create what we call a selector. I have one created already called MDaemon, but you can create another one here. Like if I create one called test, I can do that, and I can choose which selector to sign outbound messages with. Then you can define which messages are eligible for signing. By checking this box, all messages from local domains will be eligible for DKIM signing. And with each selector, you can create new public and private keys by clicking on this button. Click OK to confirm. And this window should open up with a text file containing the selector that you want to publish to your DNS record. So you would simply copy all of this and publish it to your DNS record. The next step that I would recommend to ensure that your MDaemon server is not sending out spam is to make sure you have a DMARC record published to DNS. Now here's a quick overview on how DMARC works. It works in conjunction with DKIM and SPF. So once you have deployed DKIM and SPF, then you would publish a DMARC record to DNS, or a DMARC text record to DNS, indicating what mail servers and gateways should do if they receive mail claiming to come from your domain that does not properly align with DKIM and SPF. So we publish a DMARC record to DNS, and then when an email is sent from a particular domain, the receiving mail server first checks the SPF record of the sending domain. Then, if the message is signed with DKIM, it checks the public DKIM key published to DNS to see if it matches the private key that is used to sign the message. And then finally, the receiving server checks the DMARC record of the sending domain to determine how to handle messages that do not properly align with SPF and DKIM. And then based on the sending domain's DMARC policy, the message can be accepted, rejected, or quarantined. And then an added benefit of DMARC is that domain owners can request that they receive reports on how their domain is being used. In other words, what mail servers and gateways are sending email claiming to come from their domain. So when you are deploying DMARC for your domain, you'll want to add a DMARC text record to DNS. And this is what the DMARC record looks like. As you can see, every DMARC record begins with a V equals DMARC1. That's basically the protocol version. The policy, P equals, and that can be reject, quarantine, or none. The percentage or PCT tag, which indicates the percentage of messages that will be subject to filtering based on your policy. This is an optional tag. The RUA tag, which indicates where aggregate reports are sent to, and this is usually the postmaster. The RUF tag, which is where failure or forensic reports are sent to. And then you can have various other tags as indicated here. And you can find a lot more information at dmarc.org. So let's recap how to troubleshoot when a local MDaemon account is sending out spam. First, we need to locate the outbound spam message in the SMTP out log, and then copy that message's message ID header. And then we find that message in the SMTP in log by doing a search for that message ID header to determine which IP address the connection came from. This would indicate the client or node on your network that is sending outbound spam. Next, we check to see if SMTP authentication was used, and if it was used successfully, then we need to go in and change the user's password. And if the sender is not authenticating, then that means MDaemon is not properly configured to prevent spoofing, in which case we need to make sure that we have implemented SPF, DKIM, and DMARC to help protect against spoofing. And this will also help ensure that a local account is not sending outbound spam from your domain.